Yes, that's right. What a beautiful sight to behold. Now, it looks like there's some new scaffolding in front of the White House for the inauguration festivities. Let's go to White House correspondent Wolf Blazer.
Yes, hello. The White House has in fact begun construction on what seems to be some sort of wheelchair accessible ramp leading into the White House.
And so, is it really a surprise that a president who was legally born in the 14th century BC now needs a wheelchair ramp into his house?
Well, look, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what the president will and won't need in his home. Are Joe Biden's people ready for this?
And it looks like the president is getting out of the motorcade. It seems the landscaping crew is bringing him a wheelbarrow, clearly an indication and a signal to the blue-collar values that he ran on.
Well, I, for one, think this is a fitting metaphor for the work that needs to be done moving forward.
A wheelbarrow to cart the poor old ninny into the government-subsidized nursing home. And it, looks like,
What's going on? He's what?
And it looks like the 46th president of the United States is, very gingerly, loading what appears to be his, large, swinging dick into the wheelbarrow.
Oh my God.
Famously, this has not happened in recent history since LBJ assumed the presidency after JFK, who built the ramp.
Now, surprisingly, Presidents Clinton and Obama technically qualified to use the ramp, but instead chose to walk up the steps so as not to call attention to the Bushes.
And of equal import, in front of the Blair House, the Secret Service has set up a slip and slide. Hi there, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Corbin Fritz. Let's start out with a few monologue jokes. Several soldiers this week at a U.S. Army base, Fort Bliss, have been hospitalized after ingesting a, quote, mystery substance. That's okay, boys. I, too, have woken up in the hospital after ingesting quite a few mystery substances, only I was on my way to Fort Bliss. This week, Nancy Pelosi made claims that, quote, the enemy is in the House of Representatives. Said the QAnon Congress people, the Clintons are drinking children's blood! Says Ted Cruz, but I'm in the Senate. Actress Cecily Tyson has just passed away one day after publishing her memoirs. There is not expected to be a sequel. The sleepwalking killer has expressed that he will never be able to forgive himself for murdering his wife in his sleep. Even less able to forgive him, his wife. This week, President Joe Biden reversed a decision by Donald Trump that banned trans members of the military from serving. Here to speak now is trans activist and my very good friend, who I have not seen in a while, Ariel. Ariel, how are you? I haven't seen you in forever.
I am well, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now, we are talking to you through a satellite phone. You are out in the field, correct?
That's an affirmative. I collect the casualties from the neutral zone, all for the glory of the war machine.
Ah, no man's land.
Not anymore, motherfuckers, sir. That's no person's land now.
Outstanding. Now, you just joined the armed services this past week, is that correct?
That's as affirmative as Joe Biden's pants when he gives a massage. I got my stripes this week, and I'm starting from the bottom, certainly. But I'm just glad to be able to serve my country.
Now, what branch of the military are you in? Are you in the Space Force?
Oh, fuck Mike Pence.
Are you in the Army?
Well, I do have 2 arms, but I wouldn't consider that any more Army than most.
Oh, okay. Oh, I know. Are you...
In the Navy, yes, you can sail the 7 seas. In the Navy, yes, you can put your mind at ease. In the Navy, come
don't really like guns or being yelled at. But I have to say the platoon I came in here with has really made me feel welcome.
Yes, Ariel, but what branch of the armed services are you in?
I'm in the KISS Army, sir.
But the KISS Army hasn't been allowed to serve since last March because of COVID.
No, Corbin, you're thinking of the Kissing Army. That still falls within Mike Pence's Space Force. He was more than a little weirdly obsessed with regulating kissing rather than safeguarding kissing.
Well, as long as they're not enforcing it on anyone.
No, the Kissing Army is Pence's private security detail, making sure he only gets hetero kisses from Mother.
Very weird.
Very weird indeed. But yes, Corbin, I have enlisted in the KISS Army.
You mean you have joined the legions of fans from one of the most influential rock bands of all time, KISS?
Affirmative once more. Formed in 1973 and continuing to gig through the present day, selling over 75 million albums and ranked by MTV as the 9th greatest metal band of all time.
Wow, Ariel, you really shocked me.
Hey, God gave rock and roll to you too.
I do like to rock and roll all night and party every day.
You know, Corbin, every time I look at you, I'm sure I know something.
It's honestly a reason to live for me. But sometimes when you're the king of the nighttime world, you have to turn on the night. And even after you hide your heart for 100,000 years, you realize that you're unmasked as tears are falling and you drink your cold gin.
Wow, the Fritz is on fire tonight. Look, you know I still love you, but this is a world without heroes. Yeah, I could say, come on and love me, and then you'd say I stole your love, and then we'd have a deuce, so just let me go.
Ariel, I wish I could kiss you, but I can't because of COVID. But thank you so much for making time for us today, and enjoy your time among the ranks in the KISS Army.
Talk to you tomorrow. Ah, it's 1,000,000 to 1. Somebody call Dr. Love. Goodbye.
Well, that ain't quite right, and any way you slice it, all hell's breaking loose. But that's okay, I'm sure the God of Thunder is on their side. Oh, we have one more joke? Well, we'll do it now, I guess. Governor Andrew Cuomo said today that restaurants in New York City could be open for Valentine's Day. However, social distancing will need to be maintained and will be strictly enforced by the Kissing Army. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've got a great one for you tonight. Stick around and enjoy the show. Hello folks and welcome back to the show. This is the middle of the night and I'm your host Corbin Fritz. Here with me now is one of my very good friends and fellow artistic directors here in the city. Artistic director of Q Artistry, a local playwright, performer, theater practitioner here in Indianapolis, Mr. Ben Asekwi. Ben, thank you so much for coming to the program.
Thank you for having me.
How are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty great. I mean, we talked about this earlier. It's all relative at this point, like how great anyone is, because it's been, 11 months, almost a year, since we've started all of this nonsense with the pandemic and everything that's happened since. So, but I mean, relatively speaking, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, it's a weird litmus test now when superiors or anybody, like collaborators, anybody you're working with is like, how are you? And it's like, how deep you want to get? Like how
well, and you feel bad saying, "Yeah, I'm good."
Yeah,
I'm great,
fine,
because,
great. It's
literally,
like
somebody died
cool.
yesterday, right? Yeah, so there's that. But at the same time, it's like, I mean, it's all in the sense of like maybe it's what we've gotten used to, or maybe it's just like the hope of the future. Because now it does seem like things are, at least there's a light at the end of the tunnel regarding so many things.
When do you think the crest was? When do you think we topped out at pandemic?
I don't know. I feel like it was recent. Like
I feel like we just passed it. Maybe.
Yeah. And I think I even read that maybe that was it. Like they thought that was it, was the crest. But it's weird that that also kind of was happening politically at the same time.
Yes.
Like with January 6th insurrection and all of that kind of stuff. Like it's weird that it felt like all of that was happening. Maybe it's the universe was aligning in its energies.
I would argue that the virus has never been worse than what it is right now, and it was terrible through the holidays, but it's the holidays and Jesus will cry if we don't get together. So you bend the rules for that, but
yeah. Well, and that's why they're saying that the numbers are going down, especially in Indiana now, because we are out of the holiday the results of the holidays.
Absolutely. And so everybody's just locked up and
I mean,
weeping
Christmas.
quietly into their ovens.
Yep.
So, Ben, here on your manager wanted me to ask you a couple of questions. You
My
wrote down
manager
for
is
me
so
on these
good.
blue cards.
My manager is great at making sure that I get what I need.
I started with number 5, just by coincidence. Where are you?
That's a really good question, Corbin. Where are any of us, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that I'm in a place of weirdly... Now, actually, I'm weirdly going to really answer this question in a deep way. I'm in a place of more peace than I probably have been for quite a few months, and that's mainly because of the hope that I feel, or the light at the end of the tunnel feeling that I feel.
What brings that light? What sparks that?
I think, part of it is the inauguration, part of it is the people being able to be vaccinated, and part of it is, just in my own personal life, like starting a new year always brings a certain amount of like fresh movement towards positivity. For me, it always has.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a nice, energizing, organizing time.
well, and I am a little bit, a long time ago, I feel like 12 years ago when I lived in Chicago, I was randomly watching what I believe to be was the Martha Stewart show. She had her own show for a minute.
Uh-huh.
And she said one day...
Martha Stewart, famous convicted felon.
Yep. She said on her show one day, let me try to get this quote right, if you don't like something about yourself, change it. And I've always... I remember I laughed so hard at the time because I thought, here Martha Stewart is in the majesty of her white privilegedness and saying that to the masses in a career that even at the time, I think David Letterman even had a joke about that she had made a career about saying things like, if you need to take a nap, lay down, go to sleep. If you do this or whatever, like giving people advice that was like basic human nature or common sense. Here she was giving like the most basic advice, but yet at the same time there was something so wise about that advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not so sure she was in on the wise part. I think she was just like just saying something, but like I took it as something wise. And like ever since then, I've thought of the new year as kind of like that. If you see something about yourself you want to change it.
Do you think that it is incumbent upon a person to change if they notice something they don't like, or do you think that one must be able to envision what they want instead in order to?
Ooh, that's a good question. One, I think we go down a dangerous path with like something you don't like, because that could be a number of different insecurities or whatever, and you don't necessarily have to change those, but as far as like something that you'd rather be, if that's your question, right? I think that's kind of the same thing, but like in a more positive sense, like be what you want to be instead.
I mean, change it does imply that it will remain, though changed. That it will be
like
transformed, so that
and it's all the same molecules.
rather than it's not, if you see something you don't like about yourself, remove it.
Right, she didn't say that.
She didn't say that. She said change it.
Well, it's because she's scientific. Because in science, nothing can really change form, right? Like it changes its molecules to molecularize into a new form of molecules.
Does any time in your life stand out to you when you were able to turn energy in your life into matter?
I mean, daily. I think that is something that we should do on a daily thing. Like
You think is that we as in people, we as in artists, we as in?
I think as artists, turning energy into matter is kind of what we do, and that maybe is part of the draw of people coming to see it, because they're getting to see something that was literally from the energy of even our brain processes, our synapses firing, creating ideas, and now it has come into fruition.
That is really true. Like, it is just a schematic of which neurons release ADT to, other neurons at which given time that can form...
or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Yeah, absolutely. Do you, so let's pull that thread a little bit. When you go into producing a show, do you feel like you have all of the world in your head, or have confidence that you have all of the world in your head, or do you feel that the questions that you need to ask in order to put up the show will guide you to constructing that world?
That is a great question. I thought you were going to ask me if, when I went into producing a show, if I felt like all my synapses were firing. And the answer to that is no. Because anyone who decides they're going to produce a show obviously must not be thinking clearly.
There has to be a time when you can shut off at least half your brain so the other half can cry while you're sitting on your set in the middle of the night before opening.
Right, with a paintbrush in one hand and some like Twizzlers in the other. Or a staple gun. But to answer your question legitimately, I will say it depends on the piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are some pieces that I have known, like, because I'm a writer as well, that I have written the piece, and then I'm like, the only one person that can produce this is me, because I won't be satisfied with anything else, because I have such a concept in mind, such an idea from point A to point B to fruition to whatever, to point Z. That I want to make it exactly what it is. Then I have to be okay with watering that down when including other artists.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds negative, watering down, but what I mean is watering my vision down to include their vision so that we have a flowing river of ideas.
Do you feel like you have to do that before you go into baking them into your final vision, or do you think that you should have everything down to a T and then bring them in and see?
I'm going to say no, that I need to have everything down to a T, and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes it seems to me that designers and other artists work well when they know exactly what you are looking for, especially once you become somewhat established, because they're scared of like making a misstep or anything like that. So they're like, oh, I get it. I understand exactly what's going on. This especially regarding lighting and costumes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They have to know exactly, and then they can be like, now I know you said this, but how about this instead? And I'm always very clear with designers where I'm like, you know what, prove me wrong. Like, I would love to like change my mind about this, because that means that we've come up with a better solution for this instead of my dumbass idea because I tend to go into those situations thinking I know best in all the ways, when obviously that's not going to be true, because there's people who literally are professionals at what they do.
I think that's the burden and question kind of laid at the director's feet, or laid at the feet of all artists, is like, okay, well, whose like instinct are we going on here? Are we writing on the writer's instinct? Are we banking on that? Are we banking that this performer, if you have like a superstar come into your Broadway show, something like that. I mean, that's about the only time, like if you had a college person coming into a high school show or something like that. Or, as is most often the case, like, that is the director's responsibility.
Well, it depends until you get to a certain level of theater making, and then the producers have a large stake in that.
That is true. That is absolutely
because it
true.
could just be like, well, I'm sorry, but that has to be that way because the funders are funding it this way, and all sorts of bullshit.
That is true. That is absolutely true.
Well, and even though it's true, doesn't mean that it's right. But yet, at the same time, some of our most incredible artistic creations as a country and as a world have been created literally with that design. Like, you can't tell me that there wasn't a little bit of that in Les Miserables, the original production, or even Hamilton, that there weren't some producers like poking certain different directions and all of that. I would love to hear that didn't happen, but I can't imagine that it didn't. But to answer your question regarding that, I think for me, that is kind of the joy about collaboration. Like, is be able to be sure of what you know is right, and then be convinced that it maybe still right, but only right when it's in with this too. Like, or that it's changed slightly or whatever. I mean, that's what makes it so incredible. Like, and maybe that's what gives us as artists more empathy, because we're able to understand, because somebody else has the task of convincing us of things all the time. And so we're like, oh yeah, but as a director, yeah, I mean, I think we're trained to think that, it's like, here's my vision and I've got to convince everybody of it and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't immediately have a little bit of space in your mind for change, then you're not going to have a lot of room. On the flip side of that, I worked with directors as an actor and as a performer where they were like, I don't have anything in mind for blocking for this scene.
Oh, God, yeah.
Can y'all just walk around and play the scene? And I thought I was going to lose my mind. But I also am not that kind of actor. Some actors love that kind of thing, and they want that. Where I'm like, or some directors are like, let's not even mess with the script. Can you just talk your way through the scene? And I'm like, can you kiss my ass? Because that's also not the vibe that I want to go in that moment.
That's so funny. As I have worked with more and more equity actors, I have found the need to introduce more and more structure like that.
Yeah.
I can't just say like, and now just get up on your feet. Let's just roll through this, like.
And maybe it's the fear of failure, or maybe it's because, I don't know, there could be a lot of reasons. It might just be out of practice regarding it, but it's sad. But at the same time, I also have I've been privy to many situations like that, where I was like, I'm game, we can do it, and then 3/4 the way through it, I knew it was garbage.
Yeah.
And it was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Where I was like, if somebody had a clear idea of what was happening here, or at least better instructions, maybe.
Yeah.
Still open to ideas, but I don't know, more guidelines, like, because some actors, just that's not their gift. So if you're on stage with somebody who's gifted at that, then sometimes it's golden. But if you're on stage with somebody who fucking can't come up with an idea to save their lives, then you're shit out of luck. I've had the good fortune of being on stage with many incredible people where when I have completely stopped saying my actual lines and started saying other things that were along the same line as the scene needed to go, that they just were able to go with it and make it work. But I've been very fortunate, I think. And maybe that sometimes is because I am a writer, and especially.
How does it feel to have that happen on a show that you wrote?
Well, it's interesting because you'd think I'd be so fucking frustrated, and I think I have been, because I've been like, God damn it, I'm totally fucking this up, and it was I consider it beautifully written, and I wrote it, and I want it to be said word for word, but I can't remember it, so all we gotta do is get through this and make sure what happens needs to happen in the way that it needs to happen. So on one hand, it's lovely because I know the script so well backwards and forwards that it's mine, and I made it, and so I get it, but on the other hand, it's frustrating.
How do you feel when an actor ad-libs in a show that you wrote?
Sometimes I'm like, I'm pretty low key most of the time about everything, but there are times where I think generally, especially if I'm directing it and I wrote it, that I'll say I feel strongly about this part of the text, just to make it clear that maybe memorize that first as an actor. And then everything else. But I've definitely done shows with some incredibly talented improvisers and people that some of the stuff they came up with was way better than what I came up with. So.
Yeah, that's how I got introduced to devising and writing. Was not feeling like I was a good enough writer to be writing shows, but I could have a pretty good rehearsal room. I know how to work with actors. And so getting actors in the room allowed me to get just words into a show to begin with. Within every actor is a great writer. It's just whether they can access that for specific tasks or not.
That's an interesting thought. I would say that I would agree that could be true if they could get the rest of their garbage and their ego out of the way.
Yeah. Well, it's so hard to do that job. It's so hard to stand up on a stage and tell someone that you love them deeply, from the bottom of your heart, and mean it.
Yeah.
When are you?
I think maybe the late 1930s. No, late 1920s.
Oh, you don't say.
Oh.
Well, Buster Brown,
What
tell
do
me
you say?
why do you think you're in?
Oh, I don't know. I think maybe, kid. I think maybe because I'm just so happy and gosh darn pleased.
Guy, I think that's as good a reason as any to be gosh darn pleased. Be gosh darn pleased.
Golly.
Fella, I like a cut of your jib. How would you like a candy factory?
What does that mean, cutting a jib? Late 1920s.
Late
Let's go with
1920s.
that. Because I'm a little flapper, but a little close to depression. always on the cusp of depression.
What are you?
That's a good question. What am I? I would say I'm a mixture of two things. Light and matter.
Who are you?
Who am I? I mean, that's actually a bigger question than it first sounds like it's gonna be. Because when I first heard that, I wanted to say I'm Ben, but it's bigger than that. Okay, so who am I? You know, that's one of those questions that that doesn't have a definite answer ever because it's always changing, right? Like, I mean, it could be something different today than it is tomorrow. But what I want to say is, who I am is what I am working towards being, because that is who I feel like I am inside, and so that's a construction that is in progress.
Do you think that is ever a shortcut to just feeling good about yourself without actually changing? Is to envision who you are and embrace that as you?
But often I feel like it can also be work adversely. Like you can be like, well, I'm never going to get there or whatever, right?
Oh, that's so interesting. I was asking that to you with negative connotations.
Oh,
how
both,
interesting. Yeah, because I think it does. I think it is.
Yeah, I think it can be both, but I also think it can be just. I mean, I don't know. I'm an optimist, but I like to consider myself a practical optimist in the sense of I know where I am, I see who I am, but I have optimism of where I can get and where I can be. I also am a student of the psychological brain, and I also want to know what's wrong and what's not wrong and understand that. And so in that way, I can constantly be questioning any of the thoughts that are coming from inside between my ears.
Is it harder to question thoughts or emotions?
That's a good question. For me, it's harder to question thoughts now because not that long ago, I went through a real tough time. And a friend of mine and I were talking, and she said, well, you know that's a feeling, not a fact. So ever since that moment, and of course that's duh, but at the time, I was so wrapped up in my feelings that I had forgotten that, right? Which I think is kind of an easy thing to do when you're in one of those places.
Yeah.
And so at that moment I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's not real. Like what I just said, that is something that I feel. It's not a fact, and that means that not only will it change, but it's also likely to change. And so because of that, any of my feelings or any of that, I always am I have a question mark attached to them. Because I'm like, that's not a fact. My thoughts are whole different things, and unfortunately, thoughts and feelings sometimes bleed into each other.
What do you do when you understand a feeling, but you continue to feel it?
I mean, I've been in a lot of therapy. So a therapist would tell you to allow yourself to feel that, let it wash over you, understand that it's a feeling and not a fact, and then just keep pushing forward and keep pushing on. Obviously, working with a therapist, if things get too out of hand or if things don't feel under control, working with a therapist or a counselor or a suicide hotline for that matter, or anything like that is necessary. But to be able to put that together and say, that's okay, deep breaths, just gonna keep myself occupied with physical tasks that are based on fact until I have some space to know what's going on with that feeling. Because it could be just a day that feeling changes. It could be 6 hours. It could be an hour.
Yeah.
I am ultimately hangry 3 hours a day. Minimal.
Yeah.
And so for me, sometimes I'll be like, well, why can't I get this to work or whatever? I'm like, oh, it's because I need to eat. It's like this time of day. Or I'll be like, why am I mad at this person for this very simple email that is just an instruction and just telling me what to do? And it's because it's too hot in the room or whatever. You know, like I just have to make a simple change or whatever.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, some of those types of things. Sometimes I think we forget that we're such creatures of environmental stress and that we are designed to react to those things or whatever. So to be able to like be okay with that.
Yeah.
And like give yourself a moment.
How do you value rest?
Ooh, highly. I think I read this thing one time where they said that we shouldn't be working more than 45 minutes at a time, and that we should be taking a 10 to 15 minute break every 45 minutes. I mean, after 45 minutes, right? So like to fill an hour. And not only stepping away from electronics, but stepping away from work altogether, and maybe not even reading, like allowing yourself to like take a walk or take a nap or like a million different things, because our brains are literally hardwired, like that's the most that we can handle at a time to be the most effective. I think it was a study on how to be like most effective, because otherwise you could still work for 2 hours straight, but like that second hour your productivity isn't as strong as it could be if you would have taken a 15-minute break. I find that fascinating.
What do you think is the secret to happiness? What do you think it takes to be happy?
What do I think it takes to be happy? You know, happiness is one of those things that like we all strive for. There's like a course at Harvard or Yale about it. And sometimes I wonder if we're addicted to the idea of happiness, but it's like in the form of joy, which is different than happiness. And happiness is one of those words of like, what does that mean to each person? It could mean joy to one person. It could mean contentment to another person. And those are two very different things. I would say the secret to happiness is, for me, which is the only person I can answer for, is, for me, the secret of happiness would be to look inward and move out from there.
Yeah.
That if I can be happy with myself and move forward from there, then it won't matter that this isn't as much of a success as I wanted it to be. Or
Is that true?
I think so.
Is that true that if you're in a situation that you would consider a failure, if you're happy with who you are in that moment, that's what counts?
I would say not only is it true, but it's also incredibly important.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that failure is not really the traditional Western idea of failure is not something that I prescribe to. Like, I don't believe in it. There's a great TED Talk about failure and about the difference between failure and success, and one of the things that it talks about is this artist that was painting in his or her apartment, and they or their apartment, and they take a painting and throw it in the garbage or put it next to the dumpster, and then later on, when they're a huge success, their show is getting put up. This is in New York, I think, and all their stuff's getting put up, and this person shows up with this piece of theirs for the curator and says, this is one of their pieces. They put it out. I've had it in my house. I love it. It has brought me joy like all these years. And sometimes I think, and so that right there shows you like that person thought that was their failure, but that's not, obviously, if it impacted that one person so much that they took it from the garbage and put it in their house, that's anything but a failure.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's all subjective and it's not real. Like, failure is literally almost in the same vein as success. They are both mirages, not reality.
Do you, how do you consider your relationship with the things you've created? Do you consider that to be a mirage of sorts, or do you consider that to be a true and concrete thing?
I consider
that
all
you
the
can
things I've
measure?
created to be true and concrete things because I don't consider any single one of the things I've created as failures. Because I don't think of failure as like, even if something, let's say something didn't sell really well, the things that I learned while producing that, or the relationships I built while being in it or directing it or just writing it all together, or even the way that what I learned from writing it make it so that it is way more valuable than some of the things that I've written that have sold out completely.
What do you what are some of the thoughts in your head when you first put a pen to paper? Like, what is your process to begin to transcribe an idea from the cloud and precipitate it down?
It really depends on the piece. There are pieces that I have said, oh, this is great, and wrote it down in what I call my idea book, and then had it germinating in there for years, and then said, I'm going to sit down now and write some of that, and then wrote some of it, and then like, okay, I'm going to go away from this for now, and like, it could have went on for 2 years or whatever, and then became Cabaret Poe, let's say. Or it could be something where I said, I have this idea and it needs to happen, and I sit down and I start writing, and I don't stop writing for, 8 days, and it's White City Murder. Or I have something that is commissioned, and I'm like, I have to sit down and write this thing, and I need to do it today and tomorrow because I told him I'd have it done by Monday. And so I sit down and I force myself to write it, and I do it in 48 hours. So it all depends on the piece, but my favorite way of writing is when I simply can't stop myself from sitting down and writing it. Not the most practical way to go about life, but just recently I've been writing these monologues. I told myself, allow yourself to write at least 1 or 2 monologues a week, maybe 4 a week. That's kind of my goal for undetermined amount of weeks, because you feel like you have all these ideas, and you love to write monologues, and allow yourself to do that whenever the mood strikes you. And it has been really fun.
Yeah.
Now, it's made it so that I have not made it through a single television show yet in 2021, because I'll be like watching something, and it's weird how inspiration works. Like,
Do you watch something when you write?
No.
Uh-huh.
I have to turn it off and then write.
Yeah.
But it could be something somebody will say, like, well, what'd you do today? Well, I watched on the show, I'm saying. They'll be like, what'd you do today? Well, I looked out the window and saw a bird, and then I blah, blah, blah. The scene is not about a bird, but whatever they just said about a bird springs something to action in my brain, and I write a whole monologue about a bird.
Yeah.
So it's weird because I read this book a long time ago. I can't remember what it's called, where it was about how creativity really is bastardizing other people's creative process and all that kind of stuff. And I do believe that that's true to some degree, but I generally don't flow that way. For me, it's like something that they said that has nothing to do with what they're doing. That I'm like, oh, but that's the idea in this scene. They missed it or whatever, and I will take that and run with it. But I also think that for the sake of creative freedom, that you also have to let yourself, that if you just feel like writing it, like even if there is no depth, and if you're like, this is bullshit what I'm writing right now, that's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've started off something thinking that it was garbage from the get-go and ended with something that I actually was really pleased with.
Do you ever do any like freestyle improvisation in terms of spoken word or language?
Yeah. Yeah, I've messed with that quite a bit, actually. There were some things that I wrote with Young Actors Theater that I started off that way with the students, and then I took it and formed it a little bit more, or I started that way and brought it to them for them to form.
Yeah.
And then I've done stuff with that, like from an artistic standpoint too. Like sometimes that's how I write lyrics when I'm writing songs. I'll start off that way.
Just kind of making the sounds that you make. It
Yeah.
feels good and it kind of fits, and
Especially if the melody comes first. If the melody comes first, then often I'll just be singing syllables to the melody for the longest time until something just comes into my mouth as to how it works itself into words and what fits best as far as the emotion of the melody and all of that kind of thing. I've started to write whole musicals based on that concept of a song or whatever, where I'm like, this is where this is gonna go, and then blossom, plant a garden and weed it and water it from there.
Wow. What do you write first, the lyrics or the music?
People ask that a lot.
All the time. That's like...
and because and some people do. I know that I think I was watching a Sheryl Crow interview one time where she said specifically she always writes the lyrics first. Or no, she's playing the guitar and she writes the lyrics to a melody. She sings the lyric first. And I can't remember what Dolly Parton said, because that's somebody else I go to for songwriting. I think she might say the same thing I'm gonna say now, which is depends on the song.
Yeah. Yep.
But I probably am more satisfied generally more often with the ones that I write the lyrics and the melody kind of at the same time. At least maybe for like the hook or for the chorus or whatever.
Yeah, where it comes out together, blended.
Yeah, I can write a melody and then like force a lyric on it. Sometimes that turns out great. Other times I'm like, that's never been right.
Yeah.
It's fine, but it's whatever.
Yeah. Ben, thank you so much for coming by. I appreciate my friendship with you so deeply, and I'm glad that we can always talk about art and everything else, and you were willing enough to come on the program, and it means a lot. So thank you for coming by, and you're welcome by anytime.
All right, I'll be back tomorrow.
All right, cool. Stick around. We've got some more stuff coming up.
No, I didn't care just how much they cried. No, sir, their tears left me cold as a stone. But then I fooled around and fell in love. I fooled around and fell in love. I fooled around and fell. I fooled around and fell in love. It used to be that when I see a girl I liked, I'd get out my book and I'd write down her name. But when the grass just a little bit greener on the other side, I just tear out the page, yeah. But then I fooled around and fell in love. You know, I fooled around and fell in love. I fooled around and fell. I fooled around and fell. Free on my own is the way that I used to be. But since I met you, baby, you know that love's got a hold on Yes, I fooled around and fell in love. Yeah, you know I fooled around and I fell in love.